I'm going to tell you about the most frightening experience I ever had. I'm a realtor in Willow Springs, Missouri. That's part of the Ozark Mountains and very near Mark Twain National Forest. I don't know if that has any bearing on what I saw, mostly because I'm not even sure what it was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's what happened, just last June. My office got a phone call from a woman whose grandmother had recently passed on. She had inherited her grandmother's house, which was barely within the town limits of Willow Springs. Even though I'd been living here for 28 years, I'd never been aware of the place. And this is a very small town, with only a couple thousand residents. It was that remote, set at the end of a dirt road that wound through the mountains. The client was living in California, and she told me she wanted to sell the house, but she wouldn't be able to come to Missouri. She said she hadn't been back here in many years and had no idea what condition the house was in. She did say it was a very old house, built over 100 years ago, and might need some repairs before it was marketable. Basically, my first step would be to evaluate the property and let her know what I found. The lawyer's office dropped off a key, and I drove out to the house, almost getting lost along the way. It was set way back in the woods, and the driveway was unmarked, not even a mailbox. After passing it once, I backtracked and took a guess, turning down the driveway. It was only when I saw the house number on the front door that I knew I'd found the place. It was in more of a state of disrepair than I'd expected. The client had told me her grandmother had lived out the last of her days here, but it looked like it had been abandoned for years. The roof was badly in need of repair, starting to cave in on one section. The paint was peeling and the steps were broken. There was a set of bulkhead doors on the side of the house, secured with a rusted chain and padlock. I made a mental note to ask my client for the key. I carefully picked my way through the tall weeds to the steps, watching out for snakes. We have rattlers here, you know, and this looked like the perfect setting for them. I fit the key into the lock and opened the door, not quite knowing what to expect. I was actually pleasantly surprised. Although it smelled a bit musty inside, the interior didn't look bad at all. You could tell my client's grandmother had cared for her home. There were crocheted doilies on the tables and TV stand, and simple but pretty curtains hung in the windows, probably hand-sewn. The place was clean, no dirty dishes or trash. It was just dusty and needed airing out. I walked around inspecting the condition of the walls and ceiling, trying to spot any issues that needed repair beyond the roof and exterior. It didn't look too bad, and the house, being quite large and set on 3 acres, would no doubt bring a pretty penny on the market. I figured I'd better take a peek in the basement, even though I was unable to open the bulkhead doors to air it out. A lot of these older homes have dirt basements, but I had come prepared, wearing old sneakers. I found the cellar door in the kitchen, painted white with a black cast iron sliding latch on it. I slid the bolt, opened the door, and flipped on the light. The light didn't work. I flipped the switch on and on again, but the bulb was obviously burned out. For a minute I thought of skipping the basement until the next time I came, but I wanted to be able to provide the client with an accurate home value. I went back to the kitchen and rummaged through the drawers. Thankfully, I found a flashlight. I shined the beam down the stairs. Yep, just as I'd expected, it was a dirt floor. The stairs looked okay, though. I swung the beam around a bit, checking for broken boards. It was then that I noticed something disconcerting. There were scratch marks on the inside of the door. Claw marks like the kind a dog makes when he wants to get in. I examined them in the light. They ran pretty deep. The door would have to be replaced. Filing that information away, I started down the steps, feeling bad for the old woman's dog, apparently locked in the cellar. I was careful going down, not knowing how long it had been since someone had used the stairs. I had to stop several times when I ran into cobwebs to wipe them off my face. I was getting a little creeped out, but then I was finally at the bottom. The only windows were tiny rectangular squares, set high up. It was pretty damn dark. I tried to focus on looking for foundation issues, but I was starting to feel uneasy. You know how if you have your eyes closed, sometimes you can tell when someone comes into a room, even if you don't hear their footsteps? Something about the way the air shifts. Like the space you're in seems smaller when you share the room with someone else. Maybe that sounds crazy, but as I moved further into the dark basement, shining my beam on the stone walls and dirt floor, I had a terrible certainty that something was down there with me. My heart started to pound, and I started to panic, swinging my flashlight beam around erratically, trying to see what it was. I knew something was there, and then I saw it. It was crouched up on the rafters, a dark shape as big as a man. My flashlight beam caught the yellow reflection of its eyes first, and then I saw whatever that creature was, I never wanted to see it again. I didn't take on the account. I called the client's lawyer and said when I'd gone out there, the front door was wide open, so I decided not to go in case there were vagrants inside. Then I told him, after seeing how far out of town the property was, I had decided it wasn't a good fit for me. I mailed him back the key. The image of that property still haunts me, and sometimes I wonder, is that why the bulkhead doors were padlocked shut? My family used to own a big acreage in a remote part of eastern Tennessee. There's a big fishing pond and a stream that runs through it. During the summer, I used to leave my fishing lines out at night to catch the big catfish we had. You had to go through some real thick patches of woods to reach the pond. There were a couple of game trails I would use. I would drive to the trail entrances from the house and walk about a half-mile in with my gear. I would just use a headlamp for light. I did that pretty often, and I pulled a lot of catfish out of that pond. This one night that I'm talking about, I got down to the area just before sunset. It had been raining sometime earlier, so the trail was a little muddy. About halfway to the pond, I saw what seemed to be a really big footprint. I wasn't used to seeing any footprints but my own, let alone huge ones like that. I put my boot into one of the imprints, and it was about twice as long and twice as wide as my foot. It seemed to have 4 toes, but the depth of them was what got me. Whatever made them had to be really heavy. There were only 2 of them. Like whatever it was had just briefly crossed the trail and then headed back into the brush. All kinds of things ran through my mind, but there was no logical explanation that I could think of. It made me feel uneasy, though. It was just about 9 and I needed to check the lines, so I went the rest of the way to the pond. While I was pulling up one of the lines, I heard a loud splash. I assumed it was just a fish jumping. I kept on with what I was doing. There was a pretty good haul that night. I was just about done when I started hearing this low, guttural groan, and the sound kept multiplying like there was more than one animal or whatever they were. To me, it sounded like they were having a fight. The noise was coming from across the pond. Then I started hearing a lot of loud splashes, and my imagination started going wild. I'm thinking whatever it was might be in the water swimming toward me. I was used to hearing an animal out there on occasion, but not more than one at a time. That's what was really freaking me out. I couldn't imagine what I was up against. Then I heard a loud crash in the woods just yards away to my left. My adrenaline jumped, and I started to feel panicky. All I had for light was the headlamp, so it was hard to get my visual bearings on what was happening. At this point, whatever was making those sounds was behind the tree cover. I'm standing there trying to figure out what to do, and then the woods just broke out in the wildest, loudest sounds of fighting. You can't imagine it. Snarling and howling and these ungodly yelps and whooping noises. Then I'm suddenly hit with this incredible stench, like the wind shifted or something, and all I could smell was rotten garbage and urine. I just dropped my gear and started running down the trail toward my truck. The smell was getting worse, and I thought I could hear footfalls coming up behind me to the left. But it could have been my paranoia. I felt so exposed. I decided to veer off toward the hunting blind my dad had built. It was closer than my truck, and I wanted to get some height between myself and this situation. The blind was about 6 feet high, and I scrambled up there and immediately felt better. Even if it was just psychological, I felt like I had a better advantage. Unfortunately, I had no gun with me. I had never had anything like that going on while I was just minding my own business and grabbing some fish. Everything seemed to have gotten quiet. I looked out toward the trees. The moon was barely half full and I was straining to see. I stayed completely quiet and just kept watching. Then something big came into view out from the cover of the trees, and then another one stepped out. I just about lost control of my bladder. Two huge creatures with great big shoulders and chests. My best guess was they were about 7 to 8 feet tall. One was a little shorter than the other. They were covered in thick hair but were walking upright. The faces seemed not to have hair on them. They reminded me of some type of giant ape, but different. Maybe more like a caveman, but so tall. Then the bigger one whipped around and lifted its arms up and started screaming and howling at the other one. The smaller one took a step back into the woods, and I decided to haul ass out of there while they were fighting with each other. I got home and locked every window and door and grabbed a gun and stayed up half the night watching for anything to approach. I was at the house alone. Everyone else was gone for the summer and I was caretaking the place. I called my dad the next day and he didn't know what to think, but he sort of just laughed it off. I was pretty sure he wouldn't be laughing if he'd seen that in person. I spent days dwelling on what could have been going on there. Was it some kind of territorial dispute between those creatures? What in the heck could they be? I was even checking the news to see if anything had escaped from a zoo. But there was nothing. No information at all. I wanted to tell you about a frightening experience I had in June. I was so rattled by this encounter, I've actually put my log cabin up for sale. There's no way I'll ever feel safe there again. I've always loved vacationing in Maine. So much of the state is undeveloped, and I'm proud to call myself a tree hugger. Over the years, I've seen badgers, coyotes, bear, deer, and moose, but I've never been in fear for my life until this past summer. My vacation cabin is located on Ozark'S Lake in Maine, near the Androscoggin River. I go there by myself to relax at least 3 times a year. During the winter it's difficult, as you need to drive in 9 miles on rough logging roads which are unplowed in the winter. I've skied in over the lake a time or two, but it's pretty exhausting. These days I tend to just go when I can drive all the way in. I went up there in June and had a pleasant week, bird watching and hiking, listening to the loons cry on the lake. Toward the end of my stay, I decided to hike a trail that led to an overlook of the Androscoggin Valley. It was deemed difficult by the hiking book I have, but I was wanting a new experience. I got a new experience, all right. The trail was a bit tougher than I'd realized, overgrown with brambles and fallen trees blocking the way. The amount of debris overtaking the trail made me think no one had used it for a very long time. I got to the first stream crossing and caught a glimpse of a fawn and a doe, which cheered me and renewed my enthusiasm. I filled my water bottle and continued on, knowing I wouldn't find any more water at the top of the mountain. The last leg of the trail involved steep rock faces, but according to the guidebook, you didn't need climbing equipment. There were enough toeholds and footholds that a relatively athletic person could navigate the boulders. I passed by a few large flat rocks that looked to be a prime place to eat lunch on the way down and filed them away for future reference. By the time I reached the top, I was sweating, but I felt victorious, up there above the tree line, looking down at Androscoggin Valley. The breeze felt good, cooling me down, but an unpleasant odor was carried on the wind. It smelled like death. I looked around to find the source and spotted a bit of fur visible within the tangle of undergrowth. I walked over to look and was dismayed at what I saw. It was the remains of a deer. Its head was intact, the eyes still wide open in fright. The legs and hooves were still recognizable, but my stomach turned as I viewed the rest. Its entire torso had been ripped apart. All that was left was a hollow rib cage. I felt queasy looking down at it and backed away quickly. It ruined my enjoyment of the overlook, so I decided to get away from the smell and climb back down to the flat rocks. At that point, lunch was the furthest thing from my mind, but I thought it would be nice to sit there and reflect on my trip. Within 10 minutes, I had descended to the rock field and chose a nice flat perch. I sat cross-legged and turned my face up to the sun, trying to savor the last bit of vacation I had. Suddenly, I heard a crashing in the bushes above me. I was startled because it sounded like something very big. I craned my neck to see, scanning the bushes, hoping it wasn't a bear. As soon as I started looking around, the noises stopped. It was eerily silent. No birdsong, and even the wind had calmed down. I tried to relax, trying to get back to my Zen state, but I felt anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I decided to head back. It would take about a half hour, I guessed, as it took an hour to climb up. I stood and scanned the trail above me once more, but nothing moved. I started my descent. Every couple of minutes, I would hear a twig snap or leaves rustle. I would stop and wait, holding my breath, listening, and be greeted by silence. As soon as I began to move again, so would the noises. I finally stopped and called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded pitifully anxious. I waited, but there was no reply. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was following me. My heart started beating really fast, and I had the urge to run. I tried to calm myself down, but all I could think was, if it wasn't a person following me, then it was some sort of animal predator. I was so glad to see the cabin about 50 yards ahead of me that I broke into a dead run. Immediately, I heard a snarling sound behind me, and my throat closed with fear. I knew instinctively that the animal that had been stalking me was now rushing to attack. I dropped my pack and raced for the door, getting inside and sliding the bolt. I ran to the window to look out, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I've never seen anything like it. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like my head would explode. The creature was frighteningly large, above 6 feet tall, and looked like a werewolf. I know that's ridiculous, but it was on 2 legs, and it had the head and fur of a dog. It was barrel-chested, extremely muscular, with its front limbs hanging low about to its knees. I shrank back from the window, feeling so scared and sick, like I was going to faint. I heard the long claws scrape at my wooden door, scratching and growling, and I slid down the wall, sitting on the floor, praying it couldn't get in. I could hear it moving around the perimeter of the cabin, and a horrible stench like a wet dog began to waft through the cracks in the logs. Suddenly, its head appeared in the window, and I got a good look at the face. It looked like a creature from hell. A dog's muzzle, large fangs like a wolf, glowing red eyes. It was peering in, trying to locate me in the gloomy interior. I stayed still and quiet, frozen with fear, hoping it wasn't smart enough to break the glass. A few minutes passed and it finally moved away. I could hear tearing noises as it found my backpack, and then there was silence. I waited a long time before moving, my legs going numb on the cabin floor. I was afraid to give away my location if it was just faking me out. Even though I was terrified, I made myself sidle over to the window and look out. It was gone. My backpack was in shreds. It was almost evening, and I was too afraid to walk the short distance to where I was parked. I stayed awake all night with the door bolted, afraid to even go out and use the outhouse. As soon as the full light of dawn broke, I made a run for it, getting into my truck and heading back down the mountain, doors locked, stopping for no one. I haven't been back. I can't explain what I saw, but it has ruined my little cabin forever. I might buy a different place if this one sells, but it won't be in Maine. When I was 14 years old, we moved to New Jersey. We found a fairly decent house in the Pemberton area, but it was situated in a pretty rough neighborhood. It wasn't unusual for there to be a lot of shouting and drama from the drugged-out people in the street below. I had pretty much heard it all. Drug dealers, troublemakers, drunken fights, you name it. The house was around 90 years old. It was on a big rectangle of land. The right side of the house was off of a dirt alleyway. It backed up to an undeveloped area of land, and there were tall hedges surrounding the property. We settled in and everything was fine for a while. But there were a few things that made me uncomfortable. There were 4 windows in my room, and only one of them was secured with a proper lock. The rest were the kind of windows that had 2 panes of glass, with an old-style lock that connected the 2 panes in the middle. The lock was so fragile, and sometimes it would just fall off due to how old it was, and there was a tree right outside the window. If I were the type of teenager who wanted to get out at night, that tree would have been convenient. My bed was situated below one of the windows on the east side of my bedroom. Where my head lay was only about 6 inches below the window. I had a view of the old falling down fence that divided our property from the neighbors. I started to notice strange noises outside my bedroom window about 6 months after we moved in. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was usually in a state of falling asleep when I heard it. It seemed like a weird rattling sound, like someone breathing really harshly. It was deep and throaty, and the sound creeped in through the crack between the 2 window panes. It didn't happen every night, but I'd hear it a couple times a week. I didn't take a lot of notice of it. I kind of thought I was dreaming since it always happened when I was in bed. My parents went out one night with my brother. I wanted to stay home because I wasn't feeling great. I just laid around watching movies and eventually went to take a shower. I figured I'd feel better afterward. I washed up and then stepped out and grabbed a towel and wrapped it around me. I opened the bathroom cabinet, and when it swung open, I looked in the mirror and saw something weird about the reflection. I wiped the steam off the mirror. I had a good view of the window on the wall to the left of the cabinet. I couldn't quite tell what it was, but it looked like a bizarre face. The window was open a crack to let the steam out. I jumped back and stared at the window. The face was gone. I looked out the window and all I saw was the tree branch brushing against the window. I went into my room and was just puttering around, and then I started blow-drying my hair. I was standing in front of the mirror hanging on my door, and I started to feel weird, like something was looking at me. I started getting goosebumps all over, and I turned around and looked at the window above my bed. I saw a demonic-looking face staring in at me. I don't know how to describe it, but something like a skeletal-looking horse's face with creepy red eyes. It seemed like there was a long tongue sticking out of the mouth. It was just staring at me. It didn't seem to flinch at all when I looked at it. I screamed and threw myself in the floor. There was a strong sulfur smell coming in through the window. My heart was racing. I tried to calm myself down, but I was so freaked out. This bizarre creature had been watching me blow dry my hair. I was convinced that was the thing I had heard breathing outside my window and visiting me probably for months now. I managed to pull myself together and crawl to the door and open it with my fingertips so that I could get out of my room and run down the hallway. I ran into my parents' room and slammed the door shut. I curled up in their bed in a fetal position and wished they would come home. Then I heard a knocking at the window. It was like the thing was tormenting me, trying to scare me senseless. I just laid there clutching my knees and crying. It was out there in the tree, and I didn't know what it was capable of. The curtains in their room were open. I looked over at the window, and I swear I saw this freakish creature unfurl its wings and fly off. I realized I should call my parents, and I ran out to find my phone. Then I heard the front door open, and they came in the house. I was never so happy in my life. I ran downstairs, and my mom ran over to me and asked me what was wrong. I could barely explain what I saw. She made my dad call the police. When they came, they asked me so many questions. But I know my answers sounded crazy. The report was filed, and they looked around the house and found these strange tracks under the tree. They definitely were not human. There wasn't much else they could do. But they said they'd have extra patrols in the area and said I should call them directly if I saw it again, which wasn't very comforting. But my dad did get stronger locks and security cameras. I can't imagine what the hell it was. I live in New Orleans, and as you might know, the place is full of ghost stories. We got the voodoo queen Marie Laveau, ghost tours, haunted cemeteries, all of it. But you kind of get used to it, really. I never really took it seriously and felt that most of it's for show, for the tourists. I figured as a local I was above all that. I knew what to believe and what not to. Not like the rubes walking around with a hurricane drink in a to-go cup gawking at cemeteries. That was before I turned 18, graduated from high school, and got my own apartment in the French Quarter. I work in a museum in the quarter, so I wanted to live there to be close to my job, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to afford it. The quarter is loud, but it has a certain charm, and if you work in the area, it's much easier to get to your job when you don't have to commute. I figured it was worth a try, though, and I got online to look. When I saw the rent on this apartment on Decatur, I thought maybe it was a typo because it was so low. I figured I had nothing to lose, so I called. The landlord seemed weirdly happy that I'd called, so I thought the place must be a total dump. I agreed to meet him at the apartment the next day, though. He also seemed insistent that we do it before it got dark. He kept reminding me not to be late. So after work the next day, I walked over there. Decatur is a street full of tourist shops and restaurants, and bars. The apartment was above a bar. I don't want to say the name, but it's kind of a local hangout. The type of place that serves free gumbo to get people to buy more beer and has bathrooms with graffiti on the walls. You had to walk up some stairs in the back of the bar to get up to it. Once you were up there, though, it was nice. Tall ceilings, wood floors, just one bedroom and one bath. An older stove in the kitchen, but that was fine. I didn't cook much. The back window looked out onto a nice courtyard with a plant and a little fountain. I liked it and gave him a verbal commitment, but the landlord couldn't take my deposit check quick enough. I wondered if he had a gambling problem or something because he seemed to need that money pretty bad. I moved in a few days later and everything was fine. It's an old building, like a lot of them in the quarter, so the pipes kind of groaned and I couldn't use too many appliances at once or the fuse would trip, but that was okay. That first night, though, I had a weird urge to buy vodka. I don't drink vodka. The corner store called my name. I didn't want to because that stuff's not cheap, but I also wanted to. Had to, really. When I got home, I was going to put it in the cabinet, but something told me to put it in the freezer. Something like almost a voice. Almost, but not enough to scare me. Not yet. Over the next few days, I started noticing an extra glass in the sink in the morning. I don't always do my dishes after dinner, and a lot of times I have friends come over to eat or just for a drink after work. So I wasn't really sure. Did we use 4 glasses last night or 3? After a week, I decided I'd make sure the sink was empty before I went to bed, just to see. Sure enough, in the morning there was a glass in the sink. I'd forgotten about the vodka. I finally put the two together and checked the bottle. It was half empty. I started to freak out. Who was breaking in at night and drinking my vodka? Why? I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, but it still happened. Someone must have a key, I figured. I listened but didn't hear anything. Yet the glass kept appearing and the vodka level got lower. I finally set up a camera pointed at the fridge. It would have to pick up whoever was coming in. By this point, I was terrified, and my hands were shaking the next morning when I checked the footage. It showed nothing, but the glass was still there. I watched it over and over, but I didn't see anything. Finally, I turned the volume up as high as it would go, and I heard something like a voice on the video, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. I thought about calling the landlord, but I didn't want anyone thinking I was crazy. I decided to go to the bar downstairs instead. Bartenders have heard it all, right? I ordered a beer and asked the bartender what he knew about the apartment upstairs. He said he's only been working at the bar for a year, so he doesn't know the whole story, but he heard a guy was found dead up there after Hurricane Katrina. Since then, no one has rented the place for more than a couple of months, he said. Most people just break their lease, leave the deposit, and move out. I asked him what he could tell me about the guy, and he said supposedly he used to drink in this bar. Vodka? I asked. He said, yeah, how'd you know? I said, lucky guess. He said some people say someone murdered the guy, and others say he just drank himself to death. At that point, I figured I could either move out or see what happened. I mean, there's ghosts in New Orleans, I guess. This one seemed pretty harmless, so I decided to just live with it. So far, so good.